Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here. So I'll just launch right into a guided meditation. So please find a way of sitting where you're relaxed but upright. Feel the contact with the floor and feel the contact with the seat. Notice those sensations. Are they hard or soft? Is there pressure or lightness? Is there warmth or coolness? Right with that contact where the body touches floor or seat. It doesn't matter what the sensations are, but by tuning into whatever they are, we can notice if the mind is meeting this present moment with judgment, with expectation, with desire and aversion, or if we are able to just be with, just receive whatever those sensations are. So those simple touch points are a relatively neutral and simple way of grounding the attention with mindfulness in the present moment. Similarly, we might feel the body breathing. We might feel the whole body respond to the inhalation and the exhalation. How do you experience this breath? Allow the breath to be just as it is. It doesn't have to be a special spiritual kind of breath, whatever you might imagine that to be. It doesn't matter if the breath is deep or shallow, long or short. Without judgment, we receive this experience of breath. Let go of any expectations of how the breath should appear. Sometimes people have a lot of ideas of how they should breathe, that the breath should be even, or the in-breath should be longer or shorter than the out-breath. Whatever the ideas we may have, let them go. Just let the body breathe. And bring that receptive, observing awareness, that quality of mindfulness to this body, breathing this breath in this moment. No need to turn them into a story of what a great breather I am or how I can't even get that right. Let all those thoughts fall away. Just feel this breath, however it is. Are sounds available? Is hearing happening? Maybe you're hearing the sound of my voice. Maybe there are sounds in the room or outside your home. Sometimes people react very strongly to sounds, judging whether they should be happening or shouldn't be happening, having all kinds of opinions and ideas about the sounds. Ooh, sometimes there can be a lot of suffering and reactivity. Can we let go of those judgments? The expectation that the sound should be a certain way when we meditate. And be mindful of listening, of hearing. Just hearing. Free from the extra overlay of judgment and preference. Just hearing right now. So we sit and know we're sitting. We breathe and know the body's breathing. We hear and are aware of hearing. We can be mindful of any sense stored, as well seeing or smelling or tasting, though they tend to be less active during meditation. And if thoughts arise in the mind, any kind of thoughts, we can know that thinking is happening. Not get entangled in the view or the opinion, the memory or the plan, the judgment or the anticipation, the worry, or whatever the kind of thought is. We just know that the mind door was stimulated, thinking occurred. And without fueling the proliferation of thought, that moment of mindfulness of this present moment, what's happening now? Oh, thinking is happening and body is sitting and breathing. Can help us reconnect to the simplicity of the present moment. Similarly, if emotion arises or we tune in to whatever mental state seems dominant, it could be as simple as tranquility or that balanced equanimity that sometimes arises, these subtle mental states. Not trying to entangle the emotion with the thoughts. Just notice the raw feeling, the emotional state. Let it be just that. Arising in the present moment without judgment, without elaboration, as one aspect of this moment of life. and connecting again with the simplicity of sitting and breathing here and now. So we can become aware of anything that arises in our experience. Tangled fuels it. The process of judging, that type of thinking that evaluates and judges and positions self in relationship to, assesses advantage and disadvantage. That's a kind of clinging, a kind of entanglement in thought. And we can identify that, let it go, and just let the mind rest and receive the unfolding present moment, that experience of mindfulness, moment by moment. So as we sit for a little while in silence together, continue to observe your present experience, bringing that observing interest, that mindful awareness to whatever is occurring. Should you identify that movement of judging, just notice it and let it go, grounding the attention again in that very simple experience of body sitting, breathing right here and right now. I'd like to end this meditation session with a few thoughts of loving kindness. Just simply tune in to our own good wishes for ourselves and all life in this world, recognizing all beings as friends who are born, who share suffering, and who die. We're all vulnerable in this world, and yet we can still wish, may all beings be safe. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy and free from pain. May all beings have what they need to live with joy in this world. May all beings be free. And we sense these good wishes within ourselves and share these wishes with all life, near and far, known and unknown. May all beings be well. Thank you. Now I have a topic for the talk today, and that's judging. Judging. Now, some forms of judgment are not the aversive kind of judgment. There's more the discernment, which is a part of spiritual practice. We need to wise discernment, though, does not lead to a habitual expression of contempt. It's the critical inquiry, and that can be a supportive part of our spiritual life. A discerning critical mind is adaptable. It's flexible because it's not rigidly adhering to fixed and personal views. The essential mode of wisdom, discernment, panya in Pali, is this ability to look at our thoughts, our words, our actions, and to discern, distinguish, discriminate if their roots are wholesome or unwholesome, and see if those actions of body, speech, and mind are leading to happiness or to suffering. So with discernment, we consider our intentions and the effects or results that they may have. And my desires and my preferences against the views and opinions and desires of others. Critical discernment does not assert a kind of personal superiority. It does not disparage others. So when we talk about judgment, first, I want to distinguish this critical discernment, which is a part of wisdom, from being judgmental, which is a more fault-finding, unappreciative, hypercritical, condemning, complaining, dismissive mind. It's unwholesome. Being judgmental is rooted in aversion. And although it may be rather common in our world and in some social circles acceptable, it nevertheless is a dosa state. Dosa is the Pali term for a hate-rooted state. When we indulge the judging mind, we are indulging a state of hatred. So we first distinguish what is the difference between this state of hatred when there's judging going on and an exercise of wise judgment, of discernment. And one way we can do it is to try and discern its roots. Is that state rooted in wisdom, or is it rooted in hate? Or is it rooted in conceit? With the exercise of good judgment, we discern subtle distinctions, and we might learn quite a lot that helps us grow. We might cultivate a skillful ability to assess ourselves, and in that way guide ourselves wisely toward a more skillful actions, a deeper meditative practice, and a clearer understanding of how things are in this mind, in perception, in life. We might also welcome the criticism of others if it helps support our growth. In mindfulness circles, we often praise acceptance as a kind of spiritual quality, as though acceptance is part of being mindful. But it's interesting when we look at the discourses of the Buddha that we don't find the Buddha encouraging acceptance. There's no discourse on acceptance. We don't find acceptance included in most of the lists. He actually openly and vigorously criticized his disciples for even trivial transgressions. And he criticized teachers of other sects that he considered to be promoting wrong views or wrong practices, such as asserting that ascetic or self-mortification practices would bring about a purity of mind or karma. If the Buddha was afraid to rock the boat, he probably never would have recognized the limitations of his own two first teachers, who he learned a great deal from, but eventually left their communities and went on to discover a liberating path. If he was afraid to rock the boat, he never would have rejected caste hierarchies. He set very high standards for himself and for his disciples. He searched for complete liberation, and he attained it. But the path of liberation isn't always going to be easy, and it isn't always going to be clear and obvious to us. Yet sometimes it's in the difficult conditions, or the murky moments, that we discover some great insight and some beauty of the mind. I was one time walking down the street in the springtime and admiring people's flowers, the roses, the lilies, the irises in people's gardens, some beautiful gardens in the neighborhood as I was taking a walk. But then I noticed the most wonderful sight of all, a quite amazing sight, as I crossed the street in a little crevice in the middle of the street, in the middle of the asphalt, where just this tiny crack had formed, a little tiny flower had bloomed. A little teeny tiny flower, and it was blooming just below the surface of the asphalt, so it was actually able to bloom because it didn't get crushed by the cars that passed over. And it was such an amazing sight because I had the thought, this is exquisite, though it was the tiniest little flower. And I realized that there's just no point in judging that flower is small, because we just don't know the conditions that it is struggling to grow in. And similarly, there's just no point in judging a coworker for their impatience when we don't know what they had to deal with that morning at the breakfast table. And if we're in a meditation retreat and somebody comes in late or coughs, there's no point in judging them for that, because we don't know what situation and conditions they are contending with. No one really knows what's going on in another person's life or mind. We don't know what their stresses are. We don't know what they're coping with. And we really should not demand that our colleagues and our friends have to tell us all their secrets and disclose all of the stuff they deal with in order for us to have a little patience, a little tolerance, a little loving kindness towards them. It can be our practice to offer our kindness and our good wishes with a mind free from judgment. We know how it feels to be judged. At some point or other, we've all been judged. When you're judged, does it bring out the best in you? Or does it tend to increase your insecurity, or actually increase the chance that you'll fail? How do you respond when you are being judged? Do you feel diminished, or do you consider it an attack, a spark that brings forth a counterattack? What patterns are triggered in you when you are being judged? For some people, they may withdraw or feel shame or self-loathing. They might get angry or resentful. There might be fear. It might trigger the desire to please, the desire for approval, or go into a story of blame. Judging conceit will be present in a moment of judging. How do we respond when we are on the receiving end of somebody else's conceit and anger? Judging tends to close communication, and it can create some divisions within families or a distance between friends. Even in our spiritual life, sometimes judging is a real barrier. It might seem like enthusiasm, that we are so excited about our Dharma practice. Oh, it's so exciting. We have found the thing that the world needs, and all of our friends and all of our family need to meditate. And we can be so gung-ho about our Buddhist practice that we judge all our friends and family for their material pursuits. Maybe we see another meditator or a Dharma teacher who is drinking a Coca-Cola, and we think, oh no, they should be more spiritual and only drinking green tea. Or they may be eating ribs or a hamburger, and we think, no, they should only be eating tofu or tempeh burgers. Sometimes we might have a great insight, maybe a genuine insight into emptiness or impermanence, but conceit comes in and judges ourselves as superior for all those lowly meditators who haven't yet had this superior insight. Sometimes people even pick up maps in the practice of where they are on the spiritual map and judge their progress, judge their rate of success, and want to compare it to others on the path. This is a very fruitless, useless form of judging. Sometimes we don't get what we want from someone. Maybe even in a meeting with the Dharma teacher, we wanted something in particular and we just didn't get it from their answer. And then how do we respond? It's very common to slide into judgmental habits whenever we feel a bit actions, and we're not actually encountering, we're not actually mindful of the person or the situation.
Dear Shaila, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but Shaila, you're frozen, and so we're missing a little bit of what you've just spoken about.
Shall I turn off the video and see if that helps?
Perhaps, yes.
How far back should I go? A sentence or two?
It's been happening throughout.
Oh, well,
But
thank
the
you.
biggest chunk was just now, so
Not just the first time.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I was saying that when we're judging, we're relating to our own thoughts, our own fears, our own projections. We're not actually encountering the situation that we're in, the person that we are judging as they are manifesting in the present moment. It's like we're living in a fantasy world of our own thoughts, the world of our own judging minds. And when we're lost in this world of thoughts, we don't have to deal with the uncertainty and the kind of murkiness of the present moment. Many times when people don't meditate or have not trained their minds, they live in a bubble of thought rather than the vitality and the vulnerability of the living present. An angry, self-protective position, though, just doesn't make us happy. one Vipassana teacher in the United States, Sharon Salzberg, said, if judgment were a liberating path, we'd all have been freed long ago. So true, isn't it? Usually judgments say more about the person doing the judging than about anyone else. And perhaps that's why they're so seductive. Each time we express a judgment, we are declaring who we are in comparison. We are asserting our own self-view in the world. We are reinforcing conceit. Usually we judge, though, from a very limited perspective. Some of you may be familiar with the classic illustration that we find in the Udana, where the king invites a group of blind people to approach an elephant and to describe it to him. And so since they are blind and can't see the elephant, one person is guided to approach the trunk and says, an elephant is just like a whisk broom. And another one approaches the ear and said, no, the elephant is just like a soft sheet. And another one approaches the leg and says, no, the elephant is just like the trunk of a tree. Who knows what an elephant is actually like? Who can actually describe an elephant from anything other than a limited and distorted personal perspective? This elephant illustration is a soft and innocuous example, and judgment, though, can feel harsh and abrasive because of the unrecognized aversion embedded in it. But so often we come to things, we judge things from a very limited perspective. I think one of the reasons meditators are so dedicated to overcoming this habit of judging in the mind is that when we sit down and look at the patterns of our mind, we really recognize how they're functioning. And we realize that judging is not so innocuous. It reveals, looking at the judging mind reveals a few particular patterns and three particular obstacles I want to mention. The first is that we can see a subtle aggression, that root of hate, that aversion that is embedded in the habit of judging. We can also see how it triggers conceit and arrogance, whether it's the conceit of being inferior or superior. The act of judging keeps reinforcing self-position in relationship to other. And thirdly, it reinforces an attachment to views and opinions, one form of attachment. All of these are rather strong obstacles to progress on the path of Dhamma. And we've probably all felt the suffering of these patterns and want to free our minds from their grip, because there's no peace in aggression, there's no ease in conceit, and there's no benefit from aversion and attachment to views and opinions. Surely we are seeking something more wise and more real than just habitual opinions about things. For many people, though, judging is deeply conditioned and ingrained, and it may feel almost impossible to experience things without judging them. Sometimes we habitually judge negatively and find fault in things, but some people habitually judge positively with praise about things. But both praise and blame are coming through this same pattern of judging. This chronic judgment continues to reinforce the roots of aversion, conceit, and views. That's why it's so important that as Dharma practitioners, we look at this comparing tendencies so that we can loosen their grip over our perceptions. By working with the judging mind, like working with any aversive state, we might have to face the dukkha of it, the discomfort, that disturbing moment when we see anger in its cold, harsh form, that we see that veiled expression of contempt or intellectualized act of violence arising in our own minds, that subtle form of judging that actually wants to attack another, belittle another, or feel somehow superior. Judging projects onto feel the judging projects our own feelings onto others by praising or blaming them or the conditions. It keeps our orientation external and prevents an intimate encounter with the functioning of our own minds. How do you respond when you notice that judging has overtaken your mind, that you are engaged in, caught in that thought loop of angry thoughts, of judging thoughts? First, we might practice to be mindful that judging has arisen. Just simply that. There's judging happening. Can we see that with wisdom? But we don't just know judging. We have to understand what it is. We might need to investigate a little bit to see what we're getting out of it, what it's rooted in. What is it serving for us psychologically or socially? We might need to really unpack the emotional states and the thoughts that we keep getting entangled in that pattern of judging that we may have reinforced for decades in our own lives. Criticism is also an interesting thing to consider in relationship to the judging mind, that receiving of feedback or criticism, because it can be a valuable way of learning about ourselves. So sometimes it's really helpful to hear another person's judgment of ourselves. And sometimes we end up hearing it because somebody tells us what they think of us, maybe to our face, or we hear about it through gossip. But just because somebody thinks something about us doesn't make it true and doesn't make it relevant for our own lives. Sometimes what one person may perceive as a weakness, another perceives as a strength. Is somebody really stubborn, or are they determined? Is somebody really weak, or are they cautious? Is somebody confident, or are they arrogant? In a way, who is to judge? There was one time I was traveling with a small group of acquaintances, and early friends, or friends that I didn't know very well, and they were engaged in a kind of process of group feedback sessions, inquiry, and they would meet in the evening and kind of give each other feedback about what they straight talk conversations and rather confrontational conversations. And I thought that was kind of cool that they did that, but it wasn't particularly something I felt like engaging in at that time. But at some point, they created a list of my faults and insisted that I join their conversation so that they could inform me of my personal faults. So, so I joined their conversation and listened to the feedback that they had. And it was very interesting, actually. None of the specifics were at all interesting. I didn't learn anything that I would want to like improve about myself. But what was so interesting was what they listed as my faults were a large part the things that I wanted to cultivate in my life. I wanted to become. And the disparity from what I was actually actively trying to cultivate in my life, the values that I had, from what they wanted from me was so striking that it really reoriented my view of feedback and criticism and the judging mind, and really realized that there are many things we can listen to what other people think of us, but we really need to reflect very deeply on what our values are, what our deepest values are. There was a quote from the Buddha, the Buddha that reads from the Anguttara Nikaya. You should not be a hasty critic of people. You should not lightly pass. Sorry, let me just start from the beginning. This is from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Sixes. You should not be a hasty critic of people, should not lightly pass judgment on people. One who passes judgment on people harms himself. So there's a pretty strong statement of non-judging there, but there's another line that says, I alone or one like me may pass judgment on people. So you might think, well, that's pretty arrogant. Only the Buddha can judge. But what the context for this discourse was, people were offering predictions or judgments. And basically the Buddha was saying, hey, you're not in a position to know that. How can you judge it? And I think that's an interesting thing to ask ourselves. Are we in a position to accurately and fairly pass judgment in this situation? And very often when we're judging another person, we're judging how they should live their lives. Do we really know how somebody else should live their lives? Are we in a position to know for sure? If you feel the urgent need to tell someone what you think of them, it might be worth pausing to consider what's motivating that urge to speak, what benefit there may be for you in asserting the judgment. Is the judgment creating perhaps a subtle sense of superiority over someone? You might first try to just see whatever those qualities are that you condemn from a less pejorative perspective. Maybe there's something in there that we can have compassion for, or that from another perspective might be valuable to the person. And consider also if those qualities that we are condemning in another might be a quality that we dislike within ourselves. There certainly can be times when judgment and criticism and feedback is useful, and there are times when we can openly discuss it discuss these judging concerns with our friends and colleagues. But before speaking, we can reflect on the principles of wise speech. What is the purpose of telling someone what we think about them? Are they really interested in hearing? Is it the appropriate time? Is our heart affected by aversion and anger? Or are we speaking purely out of loving kindness and wisdom? Feedback can be a great gift or a subtle form of attack. So it's vital to consider what our intentions are really deeply, really honestly, before we open our mouths to give feedback. And to also recognize that not all relationships share an interest in personal growth. Sometimes relationships are just about sharing a meal together or being kind of comfortable colleagues who share cubicles next to each other. Not everybody cherishes growthful relationships. Sometimes we'll have different roles, expectations, and relationships, even with the same person. And we have to be sensitive to the contexts. I know for myself, sometimes I go to a retreat as a yogi, as a meditator, as a student, and sometimes I go to a retreat as a teacher. Very different roles, very different perspectives. And sometimes we have both personal connections and professional connections with the same people. So we have to be sensitive to the current situation to determine if our judgment, if our feedback is appropriate and would be beneficial. And when we receive feedback and criticism, can we also practice receiving it gracefully? If we hear somebody blame us for something, can we find some equanimity in the way we hear it and develop that balance? But equally, when somebody praises us, that positive judgment, can we also practice equanimity in those moments? Most of you know that I've been teaching jhana meditation, a form of deeply absorbed concentration meditations. And I've been teaching these jhana retreats for the last 20 years or so. And the system of jhana, because there are 4 highly defined and systematic states, it's a very kind of a progressive development of the concentration with clear markers that move in the that the teacher assesses before giving the instructions to move on to the next step. So it's very easy in these systems to be prone to judgment, comparison, assessment, etc. And it, even in teaching it and defining the depth that's needed for an absorption, is the demand too strong? Is the teacher too strict or too lenient? We consider these things, of course, but nevertheless, there needs to be some judgment, some determination as to what's needed to bother calling it an absorption. The first time I attended a jhana retreat, I was on the veggie chopping team in the kitchen. And every time the cook stepped out of the kitchen, and oh, I found this great bliss in the third jhana. It was like this. And the banter was quite good spirited. There's no doubt about that. But it was filled with conceit and comparing. It was very unskillful. I practiced also in some retreats where they were monastic retreats. And in monastic retreats, very often where the teacher is describing, it's not exactly a group interview, but other people are around and there's quite a few people in the conversation. So you end up hearing, what other people are struggling with and how other people are succeeding in the practice, kind of where they are in the practice. And this model is fairly normal, I think, in Asia, but in the West, it sometimes triggers an awful lot of judgment of others, and a lot of self-judgment in some people. Even quite experienced meditators can forget that they have to guard their minds with mindfulness and not get entangled in judgment or turning that judgment against themselves with self-judgment. One friend of mine who had been practicing for decades mindfulness meditations came to his first jhana retreat in this style. And he told me afterwards that he found it really easy to listen to the meditators who were struggling really hard to sustain absorption. But he did not want to be outside the room to hear the descriptions of the meditators who were progressing through the deep absorption states with ease, because it triggered self-judgment. And the response of the retreat center was to put out a noise machine. And so the noise machine would diminish the ability for anybody in the hallway to hear anything, which is fine. But as meditators, really, we don't need the noise machine. We just need to identify judging of others, comparing mind, and self-judgment. If we protect our minds with mindfulness, that really goes is a lot more supportive than simply putting out sound machines and controlling what comes to the ear door and what doesn't. My teacher in India said, Punjaji used to warn disciples not to judge others, for if we did, we would be reborn again and again just to keep judging them, because the mind can judge anything if we give it free rein. If we're blinded by our beliefs that our judgments are right, we are taking our own thoughts way too seriously. Because when we look at the judging mind, what we are seeing is attachment to thoughts. They're just thoughts. They're conditioned patterns in the mind that tend to reinforce a position of self as better or worse, superior or inferior. I know better than them, or I'm desperately impressed by them. So we really need to observe. We need to recognize this is judging mind. And when we observe it, it arises and it passes away with mindfulness. We don't need to judge ourselves for judging. We can train ourselves to disengage from that seductive draw of the judging mind, to disentangle ourselves from that entrenched thought pattern. And know this is just another thought. Let it arise and let it pass away. So thank you for your attention to these thoughts on judging. In a moment, I'll invite some questions. I just wanted to make a brief announcement. At the beginning, our host, Marnie, had mentioned the possibility for donations. And I want to thank you in advance for any support you choose to give. As a full-time Dharma teacher, I very much rely upon and deeply appreciate your support through the Dana gifts that you give. And so thank you in advance for that support. Marnie also mentioned that I have a online course coming up. Registration is opened. It's on the theme of mindfulness of mind. So we'll be looking at Satipatthana practice, a brief review of mindfulness of the body, but we've already done a whole course on that. So this course is going to have a brief review of mindfulness of the body and then focus on mindfulness of feelings and mind states and the various conditions and hindrances and awakening factors and development of the mind. It's really quite a great course. It lasts a few months with meetings over Zoom every other week, and they're optional because there's so much activities and exercises that that even if you're not in a time zone that works for the Zoom meetings, you still will get plenty works for most people in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Israel, and kind of those time zone areas. And then sometimes other time zones can join as well. So I hope that you'll check it out. It would be lovely to see you there at the Bodhi courses. And I see that the links, she's put the links in the chat box. You can also just go to my website, shailacatherine.com. And from there, the links for my events go to the various websites that are sponsoring each event. So you can visit shailacatherine.com. So I'm open to receiving questions, and I think Marnie will be moderating the Q&A.
There's a couple of comments and I believe some questions in the chat. One by Josh. Also wondering if there's any relationship with judging and decisiveness or lack thereof. Could being overly concerned with whether or not I'm judging and or trying to predict how others will perceive and respond to me promote wavering on making choices or something similar to this?
Yeah, I'd love to respond to that. Just to mention, I did put on the picture again. Let me know if it's still freezing up. You know, these are both thoughts. There's the judging mind and there's the doubting mind. And so we have to see, well, in one way we can work with thoughts, just seeing, oh, entangled in thoughts, and ground the attention in the present experience of sitting, breathing, sounds. And we don't always have to unpack really closely and be curious. Ooh, to what extent is judging going on here? Is that comparing of my opinion with the opinion of others? That is, and to what extent is there doubt and just this undercurrent of uncertainty? Judging, it's not uncommon to have an undercurrent of uncertainty and doubt and the confusion. And that's so painful that the mind deals with it by grasping a hold of an opinion or a view. That can happen a lot in kind of grasping, sometimes a very fundamentalist. It feels better, more powerful in the mind to grasp an opinion and assert that on situations or others. But it's still very it's attachment. It's both of them are defilements. So you can unpack the defilements to whatever extent you want in your life, to just learn about your patterns, and then sometimes just see just thinking, busyness, restlessness, and let it go, and just keep the meditation simple, just reconnecting with the feet on the ground and the sounds in the environment.
I'm gonna ask Josh too. It looked like they were saying that there was another part of the question that I missed in the chat. So maybe, Josh, if you want to unmute and just make sure that your question got completely relayed, that would be helpful.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Shaya. Thank you for this. No, I was just referring to the previous comment I made above that, and which I'll just read that. I said, there may be some, and this is just overall to the talk here, there may be some seeming paradoxes like with dismissiveness and renunciation, right? Because some of those can seem similar sometimes. And then there's when we see unskillful, unhelpful, perhaps even harmful behavior, and then judging ourselves for judging such. and you mentioned a little bit of this, and then also when one asks and opens to helpful critical feedback, and then sometimes feeling like I'm being judged when it doesn't land the way I expect it to land. So the problem with that is expectations, right? And then, but the actual question here, and invite comment on all those comments. But the question I have then is, how much can a fear of judging prevent us from speaking up when when it may be needed? And thanks in advance for that.
Well, there's quite a lot there, but I think it all boils down to the murkiness of life. You know, we meet it with whatever mindfulness, whatever wisdom, whatever goodwill we can. And then we have to have equanimity as it unfolds. And then we adjust with more mindfulness and more wisdom. And things are not always so clear. You know, that's life. Life is always a little unpredictable. So we try to come from our good intentions and try to speak clear or what we perceive in as helpful a way as possible. So I don't think there needs to be a fear of judging. We don't need to enhance any fear that could silence us, but I do think it's valuable to be very sensitive and mindful of what the condition of our mind is when we speak. Are we speaking out of wisdom and kindness, or are we really speaking out of anger or demand that somebody be somebody for us, or something that we think they should be, expecting a kind of conformity, the various things that would fuel that conceit or aversion. So we look into our own minds, our own hearts, and we try to assess really where we're coming from. And it's never going to be perfect. So we just keep, living, communicating, growing, observing. And I think that's the best we can do.
Thank you so much.
I do see one hand up. Marnie, did you want to do the calling on people?
Oh, I can do that. Yes, Victoria, would you like to unmute?
Thank you, Marnie. Thank you, Shaila, Catherine, for this beautiful talk. It's something I've often been thinking about, this subject, that this kind of permeable membrane, that's the way I see it, between judgment and discernment, that we need discernment, just even looking at ourselves in terms of all of these lists in Buddhism, wise speech. I mean, wise speech is what I was thinking about during your talk, that all the different criteria to apply, is it timely? Is it appropriate? How will it be received? Is it kind? Is it, etc. As practitioners, I feel like we have to be constantly vigilant, because we have a lot of, the Buddha was very, thorough. And so, but the danger zone is in that border, between what you're talking about in today in your Dharma talk, judgment, and what I would say, I mean, for lack of a better word, discernment, where it's discerning the, wise speech or wise, all of those qualities. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, because it's, just now you said, you used the word assess, and I thought in English, we have a lot of different words that could be interchangeable, and wisdom comes in knowing which is which, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, this is a path of wisdom. It's not just a path of blind acceptance of whatever is in front of us. That would be like the blind people meeting the elephant from a particular perspective and taking that as the ultimate truth. And that asserting they knew the elephant, they knew the elephant, they knew the elephant. Well, really, there's nothing in this world that we know that fully. And so we need the humility that recognizes the limitations of our knowledge while still continuously monitoring our encounter with experience, because there are none of us that are free from defilements, right? Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be doing this on a Sunday morning and coming to or afternoon. You'd be, I don't know what you'd be doing, but we're all working with these minds that are affected by defilements. So we do assess. Is this coming from a place of kindness, or is this coming from a place of anger? Am I trying to assert my own strength in this conversation, or am I, deeply listening and offering a perspective in this? What's going on here? And we're curious how we're engaging with life in our meditation when we're just receiving experience at the sense stores, and how we're engaging with life in activities and in relationships. So we are in the situation, and what was the effect afterwards? And then we reflect back to see, oh yeah, that landed nicely. Oh, that I didn't want it to turn out like that. And so then we don't need to then judge ourselves for being horrible, but we do assess the situation, learn something, and maybe we'll respond slightly differently the next time we're in a similar situation, or we'll make some adjustment right there in the moment. So there is a quality of our awareness that is monitoring how we're engaging in experience as we're engaging in it. There's a bit of like reflecting, which allows us to adjust quite quickly. Sometimes we can shift our mood, we can shift our attitudes, we can just adjust. And I think that's all part of the discerning and the discerning wisdom. And that is very important, very, very important. This is not a stupid path. It's definitely a path of knowledge.
Thank you. And I have one more question, which is about the linear quality of a lot of things that we are doing on this path, in the sense of, for example, the jhanas. I was in a jhana course where, according to the teacher, I sort of slipped in for a second inadvertently into the 7th jhana. I know there's a lot of jhana stuff, so I won't get into that and waste time, but I hadn't experienced the earlier jhanas, so it was kind of a strange. Anyway, I didn't get tangled up in it, but I'm wondering, in terms of the idea of judgment, whether some of these progressions, how do we relate to them? Is it possible to have an insight that comes out of nowhere that is actually more advanced, so to speak, than where we are in general on the path? And how do we relate to these moments with humility and understanding, and maybe use them as ways to progress? So that was sort of a lot, but
yeah, well, I can respond a little bit to that, because I do think it is an area of meditation in the Dharma world where people do get a little entangled in their judgments of where they are on the path. And then how do we take on or hear an assessment from a teacher? And a lot depends upon the different people. Some people use the term jhana very loosely to mean almost anything related to a moment of concentration. I use the system very specifically in the development of the skill to abide for quite long durations in very specific states. To me, if somebody enters a jhana, the conditions for samadhi were present. They would have done the work beforehand. So 1 second in jhana, 5 minutes in jhana. I don't even use the term jhana for anything related to that. Sure, the mind can go to many different perceptions, but my understanding of jhana is a state of seclusion. And once one has cleared the path and developed the skill to enter that state of seclusion, one would be able to stay for as long as one wished, and would in the next sitting and the next sitting and the next sitting if one was on retreat. Basically, the conditions would be there, so one would be able to enter it again and again. So for me, the system of what's significant about the jhana practice is that it's a beautiful training of the mind for samadhi, and the delineation of the states give us the opportunity to check, to identify and check the conditions of that samadhi. So we really get to know very clearly what the states are. It's not about having an experience. If somebody comes to undertakes jhana practice because they want the experience of jhana, they're coming with wrong view. And so that actually is what brings many people to it. So they're welcome in my retreats, but I work with them in terms of right view. There has to be the right view, the understanding of what the states are, what their function and purpose is in the path, and it's a liberating path. It's not about I having an experience. It's nothing that's possessed. It's nothing where there's a kind of a badge of, oh yes, I finally got to some step here that I can feel good about. So I tend to use the system as a training. And what's so beautiful about jhana is one who can attain jhana. When one can attain jhana, the hindrances cannot arise, and they are nowhere in sight. So one is remarkably free from all the hindrances, including distracting thought, for long periods of time, which enable the mind to develop other skills and other abilities that we just can't do when we are constantly having to fight off the next different type of training, where we're training the mind in these wholesome states that are very profound, but they're not about, like momentary experiences. But nevertheless, people sometimes have an experience, and whatever the experience is, the mind pops out and wonders, ooh, never been there before. What was that? And it's so easy to slap on a label. Sometimes meditators do it themselves. Oh, I was in this jhana. And then when I'm working with students who tell me, oh, I just slipped into the whatever 7th jhana, or I actually only use the 4 jhanas, and then I don't talk about them as the formless as jhanas. I talk about them as perceptions that some people can use as a secluded state. They function a little bit differently. But anyway, we certainly can have relatively stable perceptions on any concept. So like what you would call the 5th is the concept of emptiness. Is space, or the 6th would be the concept of consciousness, infinite consciousness, or the concept of emptiness or nothingness, the absence of anything. And those are concepts, and it's quite possible to have strong samadhi and a stable experience of those perceptions. But then what makes that into a secluded state of jhana, or just a stable perception? There's more that we have to look at in terms of how the mind functions to determine what they are. So it's a little too convenient to just either for a meditator or a teacher to just say, oh, that's what it is, to do anything with it. That's why I prefer to reserve the Pali terms like jhana for very specific states that occur in a sequential training. It's not that that's the only way to do it. Sure, somebody could sit down and pick up a different object. It depends upon the object, and you say the object of emptiness and enter into an absorptive state. One can. I don't know why one would, because to me, it would be they would have missed all of the training. So why do that? I mean, why do that? Why would anybody do that? It wouldn't be part of the Dharma path. The Dharma path is the training. It's the purifying of the mind. I know there are some, movements that are popular these days to try to get the experience without having to do the work of the training. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, because you were talking about actually meditating and engaging with the teachers. So you're really on the path here. But it gives me the chance to say that there are movements these days, and you can find them on the internet, where people are trying to skip the training of the mind and jump to the experience, and somehow like make that available to people who don't even want to meditate, that somehow you can just get into this, have this. But to me, that's all. The only thing that could do is reinforce conceit. Because what we have to do is learn to observe and understand the mind. How do we relate to different kinds of perceptions and objects? And how can the mind become more mindful and clear and focused and steady and wise? Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. Thank you.
I just turned off my video because you were freezing up, and so maybe it was on my end. I don't know.
Well, it's nice to see you again. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for the beautiful talk.
We do have one more hand up. I don't know if people have time.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi,
Deborah.
Deb.
Yeah, hi Shaila, thank you. I just I was just very moved by the comment about judging and then pushing rebirth, so that the mind is so comfortable with judging it keeps recreating worlds that it could judge in. And for me, in my life, when I'm judging, that kind of aggressive movement is that you're talking about, it's sort of mirrored how I feel it. And in my mind, there's all this agitation. And what came up for me during that comment was, oh, therein lies the dispassion. That is how to look at that, forward aggression, and then find the dispassion that can lead to freedom. So I don't know if you have time to comment on that, but anyways, that was a really helpful idea.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad it was helpful. I think given that we're at the end of the time, I don't want to open up this, but I'm glad that you brought the conversation to the dispassion that leads to real letting go. So it's not about identifying, I am a kind of judging person, or I am afraid of being judged, or I am going to stop judging. It's really developing an understanding of how the mind works, so that we're no longer attached to that whole, all those activities of mind, and experience the dispassion that lets go. So I think that's just a beautiful way to close the conversation. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Shaila. That was great. Thanks.
Right.
Thank you so much, Shaila.
Yeah.